30 seconds? Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Calvary Podcast, a ministry of Calvary Episcopal Church in Memphis. The Calvary Podcast is weekly sermons, but also conversations, reflections, and provocations about the mystery of God and what it means to be human in a world in need of repair. I'm Scott Walters, rector here at Calvary Church, and our guest tonight is the Reverend Kirk Whalum. He is a Grammy-winning musician who's been nominated for that award 12 times. He's played with the likes of Barbra Streisand, Al Jarreau, Luther Vandross, Quincy Jones, Whitney Houston. It's Kirk's saxophone that actually held its own with Whitney's voice in that quadruple platinum version of I Will Always Love You. He's an ordained minister with a master's degree in religion, professor at the Visible Music College just a few blocks south of here in Memphis, and if I'm not mistaken, he has a side gig as a barber from time to time. Is that right? Welcome back to Calvary, Kirk.
Provocative, indeed. I appreciate you starting with that word. You know, you want to be evocative, but, I tend to, hang out at the border between evocative and provocative. You're right. But I am a hack barber. I have messed up plenty of people's heads. I've done a few good ones, but quickly, that story is me volunteering at Manor House because it was part of my curriculum in seminary under Pete Gackey in Christian ethics. And, I'm sitting there looking at a scenario with 95% of the folks who are guests who with needs that we're hopefully helping to meet. And then 95% of the volunteers are white. So 95% black or people of color, and everybody helping was white. And I was like, okay, that's not good. I can't sit on the side and yell, why don't we all help when, here we are with an opportunity. So I said, well, what can I do? And I used to cut my son's hair. We used to cut hair in college. And I was like, well, I'll cut hair. I mean, you'll leave here looking somehow better than when you came, but it's like a question of degrees.
Well, what's that old line about the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut's about 3 weeks?
3 weeks. That's it, girl.
I can actually imagine a seminary ethics class on the ethics of bad haircuts. I think you could go there.
Yeah, well, the funny thing that I found, by the way, is that while we're on haircuts, is that, you go into a situation before you understand what it means to volunteer in that scenario. And you're like, well, people should just be happy to get anything, But what you find is that, no. Here's an individual who's saying, do not mess my hair up. Yeah. It's like, I might be in need, I might be homeless, I might be whatever, but I do not want you to mess my hair up.
Well, that's interesting. Forget all what I wrote here. This is really interesting, and I think it's probably related to work as a musician and an artist, which is the place of beauty in our lives.
Right.
And it's not necessarily for some humans who've lifted up above certain of Maslow's hierarchies. Just at one point we need beauty. It's everybody. We have a clothing ministry on Sunday mornings, and what the folks realized is how much more it means if someone can pick out what it is and have some kind of dignity. And it seems to me a musician and an artist, this is something y'all know deeply and could teach us, that the beauty isn't something just for the elite.
That's correct, and as well, when it just so happens that when it comes to music, people are very particular. You know what I mean? It doesn't have anything to do with class or caste or any of that. It's like basically we could be sitting here talking, and the average person will listen to us talk for long enough to say, okay, well, I kind of agree with that, I don't agree with that, but I'll keep listening. But the minute I go, the person who doesn't like that kind of music is immediately going to change station, immediately. They have absolutely no patience for that, So I think it's a humbling a good, humbling realization that we are here as musicians, even as artists, as servants of people. So there's going to be a group of people, hopefully you have a large group of people, sometimes not, who do enjoy what you do. But there's going to be a lot of people who just are not into it.
It doesn't work for them.
Doesn't work for them.
But it's not like there's a neat and tidy border between one genre, and it's not that tidy, is it? You talked this afternoon about non-dualistic thinking. And when you're talking about whether I think this song is lovely or horrible, I feel like it's an entry into this conversation. How do you describe what's a good song and a bad song? It's hard to figure out how to do that. I mean, are these chops we can learn if we're not musicians, that we need to learn? What does it tell us about ourselves?
Right, no, you're right on, Scott, like that what it becomes more or less is an opportunity for me to convince you, person who may not, identify as, well, I'm a jazz fan. Mm-hmm. That person, might say, yeah, my reference point for that particular music is not something I care for. So first I got to break that down and say, what is jazz, and say that there's so many different things. And then I have to say, well, if I could just get that person to be blindfolded and have no description of what it is, and then, just try to hook them by virtue of the art, just the unadulterated art itself. Now, you notice I started with just the melody. Mm-hmm. And somebody may go, hey, wait a minute, I think I know that song, yeah. And they may be driving along, and maybe I can hook them with that. But then I'm going to veer off into the spontaneous, more personal, spontaneous composition, improvisation part of it, where I'm just sort of telling a story based on that melody. That's kind of where the jazz part comes in. And as Dave Brubeck said, who one of my favorite human beings, that jazz is the music of liberation. It's the music of freedom. Because jazz was that music. First of all, it came along where black musicians or musicians of color were the ones, running the show in the sense that, oh my God, I want to learn how to play that music. Where can I learn? You got to learn from black people. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the black musician was all of a sudden in a sphere where your voice, what you have to say, what's in your heart, what's on your mind, is valid, period. Like, just say it. And we just need to hear what you have to say. Again, not play, but what you have to say with your instrument. And then the white guy comes along, then the Asian guy, and then the Native American, and whomever. So, that is a humanity, sort of scenario where it's like we're all bringing something unique and we're better together. And jazz is undervalued for providing that platform.
It invites it.
Yes.
It's fascinating. And I think you used the word convince. Before you started, when you said, maybe I can convince you of something when I stepped, and I latched onto that because usually when we think about these disparate peoples who have different experiences and different worldviews, convincing means I need to convince you that I'm right. But you just did something different. You took a melody that was familiar and then brought a little of yourself to it, and now you're describing a process where other people can bring themselves to it, which feels kind of radically needed right now as
Yes.
we're trying to figure out how in the world do we hear what anybody else has to say.
Has to say.
Is that process something we can learn from if I can't play quite like that?
Right. So you're right. I mean, it's like on the one hand, this dualism of, the political sphere where it's us against them, and it's this right against left, conservative against, liberal. It's bifurcated. It's like it can't be a little bit of both. It kind of has to be one or the other. And you need to be convinced by me that my way is right. Right? And then you back off of it, you zoom out, and here comes music, which is so much more effective in grabbing a space where we can, if not agree, we can relax and sort of all be swept up into it. And then, now it changes the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. You can have a political discussion then, but it's not dualistic. It's more like, here are shades of this and shades of that. Yeah. Which is not to say that I don't have my side. I am not completely delivered from dualism.
Well, no, but that doesn't, what you're describing doesn't mean anything goes. It's actually very difficult for people to do what you do with other people. It takes an attention in the moment, and you can't just throw any note in there and it works, right? So it's just a different way of talking about constraints that actually hold a community together, it seems like. You're talking about a process, I have to attend to exactly who you are in this moment, and we're not very good at that right now, because I'd rather deal with the category.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, you learned your father was a minister?
Yes.
So I'm assuming you started singing in church.
I started playing in church.
Playing in church?
Yeah, singing and playing.
Well, tell us about that, and maybe even how, when you started to go beyond the walls of the church, were those categories ever problematic, that you were taking music into places where it wasn't God's music?
Right. I have to, first of all, thank my mom, who was tuned in today. Somebody told my, but you hear, somebody called my mom and said I was going to preach here today. I just want to thank you. Because, Mom, thank you for...
But you need to know if your mom's listening.
That's right,
So
man.
you need to have a warning on that.
Seriously, I wish I'd known. But, no, I actually shouted her out. But my mom and stepdad live in Kansas City, and I'm just, so grateful for them. You're right, though. My dad, as not only dad, but pastor, in fact, his nickname was Reverend Daddy.
Not just for you.
Not just for me, man. That was part of sort of, maybe why I'm dysfunctional to this day is because, I shared my dad with all these other people. Yeah. And so we all called him Reverend Daddy, and he would just as soon get in their face as he was mine. Like if I did something or they did something, out of line, he was in your face, And so I was glad to share that part. But yes, my father in particular, because he was the sort of the lawgiver, was of the opinion, my dad was way ahead of his time. He was very progressive in the sense that Olivet Baptist Church was going to have a smoking ban, and people were going to wear the latest fashions and kind of chill, and it wasn't, very structured in a conventional way. And when his 14-year-old, I guess maybe 15, came and said, Dad, I got a gig at this club, playing behind this blues artist or whatever, some terrible gig, but to me it was a gig. And my dad was like, yeah. Imagine you walk up to your pastor father, say, hey, Dad, psst,
yeah,
I got a gig, can I go play? And so he was, again, Mom was like, sitting there, this is on you, man, And so my dad was like, yeah, go right ahead. He said, here's the thing. You better remember who you are. So it's not about where you are, right? It's about who you are when you are where you are. So, and my wife took that and ran with it. So she was telling our kids, remember who you are and remember whose you are in wherever that setting is. And I've really taken that to heart. And I actually got in trouble with that eventually because I really kind of was in jazz clubs kind of preaching, which is not cool in one sense, because people are like, hey, I paid my money for you to play the horn.
Tell me about Jesus.
But I thank my dad for that.
Yeah, I think that's rare. I think whoever we are, especially for raising a child, we want to fence around them.
protect them, and especially when it comes to the church culture. Someone said that culture eats religion for lunch. And that's true, because it's not so much about what are the tenets of the faith. Boil it down. What does that say about so and so and so and so? Because sometimes it's hard to know that. But what does the religious culture of your area say about that, or your denomination, or your neighborhood, or whatever? That is the thing that ends up, wrecking some people's lives, and then other people it liberates them to fly like a bird. So, yeah, my dad was kind of the, ground zero of a culture that allowed people to be who they are, still serve God with this individuality,
And there's some trust in there that you're actually being equipped to go in a place that's different from this one.
And of course, within that is, giving you just enough rope to hang yourself. Like let you fall, let you trip and figure it out. Whereas, if we keep you so tight, I have some friends who are in a particular denomination, some of my musician friends, who that thing is so tight, about you can't wear jewelry, you can't do this, you can't do that, and they are some of the most sexually dysfunctional people I know.
Yeah, the rule, well.
That's a whole nother conversation.
But we know this about ourselves, right? We know, it's the first story. It's the first story. Here's the garden. Oh, not that tree. Oh, it's the first.
Which one was it again?
It's the first story.
That one?
It looks interesting. But I love this idea of really when it comes to faith. A lot of people look in on what faith is, and they see it maybe from the outside as a collection of rules and borders and behaviors that define somebody as being okay, good, holy, clean, all of those things, rather than a collection exercising muscles, exercising ways of being in the world that could actually go and engage the world in a better place. That requires discipline.
Yes.
I keep putting it back on, thinking through your experience as a musician. It takes hours and hours and hours of practice to let go and improvise, right? That seems like a rich metaphor, not just a metaphor, it's real practice in what it means to be a Christian in the world. I think y'all have a lot to offer us, and let's talk about COVID a little bit related to this, because this has been a hard year, full stop, hard year. But for musicians and creative people, it's been an especially hard year. And in hard times, it feels like beauty and art are the first things people assume need to go.
Yeah.
So I'd love you to talk about the last year and how it relates to all this for you, just spiritually, as a person, as a performer.
Well, thank you for bringing it up, Scott. And since we are neighbors, people may not know, there's about 10 houses between yours and mine. Sorry for the many times my dog has pooped in your yard. But,
I'm honored.
I'm thinking he would say, yeah, you should be on. But,
Biscuit can come in.
The thing is that the hard kind of pragmatic side of the dream that I wanted to live, I'm living this dream of traveling the world playing music, playing my instrument. Like this thing opened the door for me to do what I have always wanted to do, and that's travel the world. And to share my art and, of course, my heart. Like, I've always from the beginning wanted God to be front and center in what I did. And I didn't necessarily know what to call that, like, are you a minister or are you, whatever. But so I kind of, morph into whatever that is. But to be a traveling touring musician in a pandemic is extraordinarily difficult. And again, it's all contextualized in the suffering and grief that so many people, maybe even here, have experienced in this pandemic. Some have actually lost loved ones, or maybe been sick themselves. Just financially, about 70% of my income just went out the door.
Right.
So, God has provided. And my wife, my girlfriend, who I met when I was 15, I met Jesus and Ruby at the same camp. I fell in love.
Not necessarily in that order?
For real, man. I'm not quite sure which, but it was that week of camp. It's Baptist youth camp. But I met them both, and I fell in love with both of them. And, she has this saying that God keeps us eating out of his hand. The lucky ones, it's like wealth is awesome. And black people were, systematically sort of, kept from, real wealth because of certain things that were put in place, even in our government, but certainly in our culture. Mm-hmm. But what that did in some other ways is made for a different kind of fabric of dignity and sort of, I'm not finding the word, but, put it like this, music that now and has now for 100 years reached the world on behalf of America has been black music, or black music that has morphed into other things, i.e. rock and roll. All of that goes back down to the Mississippi Delta and Memphis, and, so like black music, black culture has become that thing that spiced everything. It wasn't everything, lest we be arrogant, but the root system of all of that art is black. But then to say that, it also changes your priorities and the way you do life, to where you start to see and this is not just black people, it's just, poor people in general. Yeah. You start to see the stuff that really matters and value the things that really matter. Like if you want to see somebody really celebrate, you go to a quinceañera. Okay, where daddy just got through, roofing somebody's house with a team of immigrants, of illegals, which makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I hate that word, because no human being is illegal. But so you go to that quinceañera, and you're going to see some celebration. Yeah. Right. And so in that sense, what we find lived out in the pandemic and in the musical terms, just to use, that as a template, is that, man, I really am so much appreciating the things that I was able to do before the pandemic. And also, man, I can sit in my house and do that in such a way that is the sacrament, as it were, of the bigger thing. Like I can really sit there. I mean, I'm making lots of video content. I'm doing lots of actual projects in my studio, but I can also just sit there and play. And there's an aspect of that is so rich and so rewarding. And finally, the financial part, Ruby says that, there came a time when she said, you know what? I mean, it was 30 years ago. We've been married 40 years. She said, I'm done worrying about money. I'm not going to ever worry about money again. And I'm like, do you know something I don't know? But what she was saying was that God will provide. And so what we found now in a very special way during the pandemic is that, God keeps you eating out of his hand. You have to be close for a bird. You have to have proximity for that bird to eat out of your hand. You can't feed them from over there. And that's the sparrow metaphor, like, God takes away the thing that you think, well, I'll be fine because I've got records out and I got a Grammy and I got blah, 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 and I'll be fine. All of a sudden, holy moly. Yeah. And yet here we are. We have no outstanding bills, like, I mean, maybe sometimes people think if you got a Grammy, you got, record contract, that you're rich, Well, I'm not. and to prove it is like just month by month, God just sees to it that we're set, Yeah.
And part of it sounds like Ruby's wisdom is, I've got to adjust my definition of enough. because I'll never get there if I can't receive it.
And you just described the COVID blessing. I mean, I think that's a really articulate description of deciding, making a conscious decision of what is enough. Where is the space where you know, hey, you're breathing, you can move, nobody's knocking on the door to take the keys from you. Just start with that list of things that maybe you had a blind spot. You couldn't see those when you were out there going after it. Oh, I want a bigger and a better and a bigger and a better. It's like, does that really matter, though?
Yeah. So many places to go with that.
Why don't I play something while you decide where we go next? Maybe as an example of how, what is
something that I'm interested in this conversation too is, and maybe you can play something about that, is when you started to talk about the suffering of African American people and different people and beauty coming out of difficult situations. I mean, one of the best things I read during COVID was Howard Thurman's Jesus and the Disinherited, right? And he just says, we don't understand the gospel until we realize it was written to and for those people. And if you're not that, you're overhearing it. And the music that came out of these, we would never say, let's create Jim Crow so our music will be better. Wrong. And yet in spite of this broken, sinful world, this music with a knowledge of suffering and brokenness, it seems to be part of the music that's so important. And so, I mean, where did that register for you that the experience of suffering has to be a component of even joyful music has to have a knowledge of suffering somewhere in it for it to mean something to us.
As Richard Rohr would say, order, disorder, reorder, or the concept of necessary suffering. You know, those things that, again, when I preached earlier, talking about those concepts that come along and color in between the lines of, of what is it to walk with God, what is it to walk amongst your fellow human beings in a way that reflects the goodness and purity and beauty of God in the context of suffering, Well, let's say, for instance, all indigenous music that we know about, you can never say all, but most of it centers around this pentatonic scale, penta 5-note scale. That's the minor version of it. The major version is. Right? So you would find that into the space where we kind of define this music as African American music, you find that indigenous scale in just about everything. And the further you go down the root system, you see where blues came from, you see where the spirituals came from, and you see where just about everything came from. But it's hard to draw the line, right? What's sacred music? What's secular music? What's the difference?
get it.
Yes, sir.
Beautiful. Tell us about this. You said you travel a lot. You told me on the porch the other day that your happy place is Japan.
Yes.
How has being in other places, in other cultures, informed what you're talking about, this deep musical tradition that you were brought into?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, there's the sort of exotification, I think I'm saying that right, of, the reason my music and our music in general, black people and jazz music, is accepted so voraciously and other cultures is because of the fact that it didn't come from there. Mm-hmm. And it's excellent, but that is a big part of it that, other people see what you do in a different light. Mm-hmm. And I was in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and I was asked to sit in with an artist there. Eventually, I make this project called Humanité, which is a documentary and record. Feel free to go to my Facebook page and see it, but Humanité. So I was asked to do to sit in with this artist, this Muslim kid who's 23 at the time, and I knew he was a pop star of sorts, but I didn't know just sort of the degree of that. And they were like, yeah, well, we would love for you to sit in with him. And I'm thinking, how's that going to work? Like, how's that going to look? Like, I'm a kind of older jazz musician from the States, and here we have this vibrant Southeast Asian pop, a scene, and yeah, that, for me, it was a no-brainer because, again, it's just music, so we're just going to get together and do what we do. But I did have that thought, sure enough, again, because culture eats religion and just about everything else for lunch. So I walk out, I couldn't see the audience from where my perspective. I entered through the back, and I met this guy named Afghan. And he's like, man, I love, you played with Whitney Houston. Oh, my goodness. Like, he's just like trembling. He's like, she is my ultimate hero. So, man, I'd love for you to play on this song. So the band kicks off. He does his thing. And then he said, welcome my special guest, Kirk Whalum. I walk out. I'll get back to Japan, I promise.
No, I like this.
I walk out. There are 4,000 screaming girls. I'm going to say the average age is 15, right? Because this kid he is a beautiful human creature, right? And of course, he's the heartthrob, and he sings great, and the whole thing is a sweet kid. But I walked out to go like, okay, so yeah, the sort of exotification of what I am, what I do, where I come from, who I am, all that has worked to my favor in this moment. There are other moments when I'm here and some dude passes by with his loud pickup truck and calls me a racist name.
Right.
Different
response to difference.
Exactly. So in other words, both are happening. It's just now I'm in this place, this panacea, where it's like all of a sudden I'm a big guy.
Interesting.
And then just to say that Japan is that place that has maybe been more so than any country in the East for sure, where jazz music has just been, it's been the cat's meow for 100 years. And, back during the wars, it was jazz music, again, Black American classical music, we call it, that those people, just can't get enough of. And so I go there at least, once a year. Some years I don't go, but pretty much every year, sometimes twice a year. And I love it so much. Ruby and I want to, have a place there at some point. Maybe when things get going again, I could start making money again and buy a place.
Fascinating. I want you all to know that in the next 5 or 10 minutes, we'll be happy to take questions from y'all. So be thinking of what I'm not asking, Kirk.
The jacket is Nigerian. No.
There it is. There it is. And it'll be auctioned after the show.
That's loud. That thing is loud.
You mentioned, it seems related to this in different cultures, you mentioned in your sermon today a little bit about maybe even learning appreciation for other religions and what they might have to offer in aspects of God. Is that an evolution in your understanding, in your dialogue with other cultures and people that's expanded or changed over the years?
It really has, Scott. And I'll say that Memphis Theological Seminary has been and continues to be such a watershed experience for me. Going to MTS, just having my head ripped off, theologically, and then sort of carefully put back on has just been such a joy. And a big part of that is what you speak of, that you go in saying, well, yeah, let's talk about Jesus. I'm here to have a Bible study every day of the week. I'll have a Bible study in this class and a Bible study in that class, and it's going to be awesome. And they're like, no. Yeah, that's not what seminary. We have any other seminary grads, seminary folks? Right, so it's most definitely, at the good ones, you are there to have your preconceived notions and your faith challenged, and to open you up to contextualize the things that you say you truly believe. Mm-hmm. And I was not looking forward to that. I wasn't ready for that. But boy, I tell you, it has been such a blessing because it as it turns out, the gospel of Jesus Christ stands up. Yeah. But you don't know that if you don't ever get out. And then to say that the traveling part of it just has been, has always been, but now especially with these new eyes that I have after seminary, has been so amazing because I was a little skittish before, I traveled, and I was like, hey, why don't you come? We'd love for you to come to our Buddhist prayers here in Kyoto. And I would, in '85 when I first went, I'm good. I'm good. But man, oh man, I have just, whether, Shinto or Buddhist, Muslim, I have just loved learning from and being humbled by, first of all, people's religious practice. Okay, just whether it's the practice of meditation or the practice of, I wake up every morning and I go from my bed pretty much straight to on my face. And I envision in that moment the Muslim friends that I have, and that's what they do 5 times a day. And I'm like, the average Christian, yeah, there's a lot of Christians who have never been on their face to prostrate oneself before the King of Kings. It's like now we're in this setting where God is my buddy, and I hear these prayers, thanks, Lord, for just being so cool and doing what you do, hanging. Thanks. I'm like, okay, I get that, and I'm glad I have this rapport with Jesus, but man, I'm on my face, and that is something for sure, Scott, that came from travel.
I mean, that feels like it comes all the way back to the beginning of this conversation where you picked up your flute.
Yes.
And let me convince you of this. We want to have these discussions about the nature of God in the head, and we have the categories of who's a believer and who's an apostate and who's whatnot. But when you're talking about heading to practice, all the religions say, whatever you think about God, it's not right.
Yeah.
You can't, you just wing him on the earlobe, right? So there's something true to what you're saying in this turn toward practice that feels like it's a little genre busting that could be a helpful way to look at dialogue with people of other faiths.
Yeah.
It could be vigorous and
right. Well, I think
challenging.
a big part of it is humility, that it's easy when you're so sure about something to then also become arrogant about that thing. And you begin to diminish and sort of dismiss other people's faith traditions, other people's existential grasp on life and the ways that they understand the Creator, the ways that they understand, who we call God. I mean, again, it's just been a revolution for me to get to a place where I don't have to be right. It's this kind of, again, back to the dualism where, well, if Jesus isn't Lord of all, then I'm in trouble. It's like, well, no, don't worry. I'm not throwing the baby out. I'm just just wondering about the bathwater. We can just discuss what the bathwater looks like. And as well, we can say that this individual, God is the judge. And God will determine all of that. He'll sort all those things out. And at the end of the day, the grace, the hesed, the grace, mercy, loving kindness, we say miséricorde in French, of God is so far beyond our comprehension and is way out in front of any rational discussion, any dualistic, bifurcated conversation I'm going to have. Like, the grace of God is so huge that you just need to be open to see what God's going to do next. And don't worry, if you don't figure out today, just get tomorrow morning, start back out on your face and watch God do a new thing tomorrow too.
Yeah. If we could learn to go to practice before we divide it up in our camps, how much could be healed?
Absolutely.
You talked about that in the sermon as well today.
I'm going to play this melody. I know somebody's going to probably have a question.
Yeah.
The idea that the Buddhists, for instance, talk about resonance, like meditating and having certain frequencies that, resonate with your body, connect you with the earth and all of creation and all of that. And we all kind of poo-poo that away with conventional Christianity until you realize, wait a minute, I did feel different once that sound began. All of a sudden, the sound changed something in the atmosphere, and it changed something in me. Mm-hmm. And they were like, well, yeah, the Buddhists were trying to tell you that,
yeah.
You thought you had to give up Christ to say, yeah, man, that's right, you're right about that. There's a saying, a friend of mine wrote a book called Jump and the Net Will Appear. And to me, that sums up what it is to be a musician in general. Like, you talk about making your living because of something you're holding in your hand that has keys on it. That it is a preposterous idea. But yet I've done it. And then you come to the point of saying that, I don't know in a given moment if it's not playing a particular piece like I did with Kristen today or something we worked on, if I just want to go, no, let's just do something completely new right now. Like what I just played, I don't know what that is. Maybe we'll listen back and I might take that and make a song out of it. But it is new for this moment. Mm-hmm. And it's about me taking a breath. And I like the fact that I'm a wind musician, a wind artist, because what you do is connected to God in such a profound and personal way that you can't do it without that breath. As we see with COVID, like people with respiratory problems, have really struggled. But you take a breath and you jump out there. It's like you get your glider wings on and you jump off that cliff and you just hope that thing works, Sometimes it doesn't, musically speaking, but it's all good. It's such a beautiful life. I love it.
It's the ruah.
Yeah.
Breath, spirit.
Ruah.
I know. I'm hoping we have some questions out here. I think Heidi's got a... She's got a microphone here, so raise your hand if you've got questions for Kirk.
What is my dog's name? His name is Biscuit. And what kind of lawn does he prefer?
The one with all the dandelions, I know.
It is so funny, right? Like dogs, they're so persnickety. I'm like, you were gonna pee on that. Why is it so? Anyway. Pardon me, I didn't mean to.
It's exactly the lead-in she was looking for.
I grew up going to Olivet, and fondly remember the day that my mom, who's here with me, took me to Olivet, and she said, "Do you want to join? Do you like it here? Like, do you want to join?" And I said, "Yeah, they play the saxophone here. I definitely want to go to church here." And I came to find out that the church itself seemed to really be supportive of expressions of artistry in the field of faith. And I came to find that there was so much talent there on Sundays, and everybody was just given the freedom to express their gift. And I just wondered how that shaped your journey and how communities of faith can shape the journey of up-and-coming musicians.
Wow, what a lovely question, and nice to meet you. I mean, that's very cool. You're taking me back, all these memories. And by the way, that building, the original, the original was on Calhoun, but the building that all my childhood memories are pretty much was on Southern of Olivet Baptist Church, and it was right next to the Bunton Cafe, which, you could smell those biscuits, rolls, I mean. So I think you're right, especially, and it comes from the top, where there's a person who's open to what God decides to do as opposed to what that person's preconceived idea of, how should the worship music sound, what is the overall culture here when it comes to artists and creatives, and, how is this something that's important? Is this something that is worth us investing in? And I'm telling you, man, I cannot even sum it up, just how super important it has been as fertilizer. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the outliers, right? So I'm an outlier in that sense. Yes, I put in my 10,000 hours plus, but I was planted in a place where this overall spirit of an environment of empowerment was just so fluid and so beautiful. And it continued, like I told my nephew, my son plays with Kelly Clarkson. So if you ever see the Kelly Clarkson show, that handsome bass player is our son. He looks a lot more like Ruby than me. But, and then I have nephews who played with this one, played with that one. So this other nephew, he came to me at age 12 and he's like, well, I got my bass over here and I got my trombone, and I like them both. What do you think I should do? I said, man, I hate to burst your bubble, but man, stick with that bass because it's hard out here on a trombone. And there are literally trombone jokes. There's so many trombone jokes.
I played it in the 7th grade.
That's why you're such a good pastor. I peaked
early. Yeah, no.
You peaked early. That's why you're such a good pastor.
I'm sure it is.
But, so I said, yeah, stick with the bass, man. And so fast forward, and Cameron plays trombone with Bruno Mars. And so, he has been around the world 5 times before I, even get on the plane. So, it is absolutely a beautiful testament to the environment, the soil, the fertilizer that says, you're here. We're going to talk about Jesus. We're going to worship God. We're going to, bring you closer, hopefully, in your walk with God and start, rounding out some of the rough edges. Meanwhile, who are you and what is it that you are here to share with the world? Let's talk about that. And if it's a creative endeavor, then you got to come with it. You can't be messing around,
That's powerful because what she's identified is we might think the way to welcome more people is to lower the bar. But what you've described, and I'm hearing you all describe, is musicianship at the highest level that has an invitation embedded into it that, come on, we're going to challenge you. I mean, that seems like a powerful model for faith.
It is
life.
A beautiful model for faith. And then just, taking it back into the music area to say that, there is absolutely, in the faith realm, there's a mediocrity that is endemic, is unfortunately rampant in faith community because, again, part of it is understandable because you got a volunteer army in most churches. Most churches don't have enough money to pay the kind of, like a Christian, like really, really good artists and musicians. But at the same time, man, I really love the fact that my dad understood, and I'll mention another denomination that is really good at that, and that's Seventh-day Adventists. I have a lot of issues with their doctrines and stuff, but one of the things that they do well is that if you say, well, I'm going to play the piano, they're like, okay, and what college are you going to get your master's from? You know what I mean? Not like some of the church I grew up in, like, well, the Lord anointed me to play the piano. I'm just going to go up there and sit down. And thus, the mediocrity. And then when you try to plug in, I look at the sound crew, like some of these guys, I run into these people out at the Orpheum or in other venues because they're professionals, like, again, when you plug into the world writ large, you don't want to represent Christ with mediocrity. So, yeah, I'm grateful for that.
Anybody else there?
Yeah. My story is, you already know it. So,
I think it's fascinating, and I love that you called out our sound folks. One of the things that we learned in this last year, we're not a mega church. We're old school, right? Pipe organ. But that means we weren't set up to do this thing. But we had people in the congregation with gifts. Noah, who's doing our filming, and Bernie on the sound. And I was fascinated to learn how important sound was to our live streams. And all of these things are, is there a means through which we can connect people back to the gathered body that they're separate from? It reminds me a little bit of you, and you're describing how you had to imagine yourself back into the concert hall when you were in your studio at home by yourself. It sounded like this. What are the resources we have to connect with?
Yes, Lord. And the fact that you empower people, you help them get the training. And I'm going to say this, this is an area that we can be proactive with minorities. Right, because we need to take certain things off the table, like this sort of like, oh, well, that's not fair. We can't give them more than we gave this one. No. We need to give these folk a little bit more than because these are the folk they started down here with no resources and no connection. So, yeah, we need to empower, and this is something I'm preaching to the choir because Calvary is way on that. Y'all are on it. But to empower youth in particular, a lot of churches miss this, to go forth. You are empowering them to go get their education and go out there. If they end up coming back and helping you out, that's nice. But don't, people, they say, oh, we got a good one. Okay, so we got to hold on to them. Can't let them get out. No, let them go, man.
Yeah. It's hard to do. It seems like it's back to the whole control. That impulse to control that musicians and artists can train the rest of us in letting go. And,
I think Sting said, if you love someone, set them free.
Yeah, I have that record. We probably have room for one more if there's a burning question someone has out here.
My wife had a question like, where am I taking her to dinner tonight?
Anybody got any ideas? We can do suggestions.
I want to thank you for my waffle today. It was very important to me.
I don't really have a question. I just have a comment. First of all, I saw you at the Dave Matthews Show here in Memphis in May 2 years ago. It was fabulous when you came on stage. But you were speaking about just a minute ago how being very confident in what you believe can bring about an arrogance sometimes. And I was reading how you pray with your band members sometimes before you go on stage.
Hey, 1 second, hold on.
Is it not on?
Since you're over there pretty much by yourself and significant other, would you take your mask off? Because I'm having trouble understanding you. Sorry.
Can you hear me better now?
I can hear you so much better.
Thanks, so.
You saw me with Dave Matthews.
I did. It was fabulous. You played your heart out. I remember it was a big night. But you had mentioned earlier when you were speaking earlier that you felt being very confident in what you believe in can bring about a sense of arrogance, when you're trying to explain how you feel or what you believe in. And I thought that was pretty good. That was a really good point because it's hard to express, in today's culture or how to share your faith and who God is and that kind of thing. And I had read where you pray with your band members before you go on stage and that some of those band members may not be religious or whatever, but they tend to follow along and be spiritual about it. And I thought that must be a compliment to you on how you come across and how you bring your spirituality into other people and are able to share that. So I just wanted to make note of that. And if you have anything else to mention about that.
Yeah, listen, I really appreciate you mentioning that, and especially to say that as an example, the Dave Matthews concert that I was just a guest on, my friend Jeff Coffin is his sax player, and Jeff Coffin is like, again, to talk about, you can't afford to be mediocre in a world where Jeff Coffin is playing the saxophone. There's so many great musicians who play this instrument. So I have always been one, I don't want, like, if I'm in church and they're like, oh, honey, he can play that saxophone. Oh, my goodness. I even had Scott Morris, as they introduced me, he said he's the very best saxophone player in the whole world. I'm like, Scott, knock it off, But so in that sense, I'm grateful to hobnob with that level of musicians. And to say that Jeff, for instance, is Jewish, but not so much by faith, but as what do you say, culturally. Mm-hmm. And just the sampling, spiritually speaking, religiously speaking, that the folks in that band backstage, now we're about to go on, are all over the map. From me kind of being evangelical to atheists, and Buddhists and this one, that one, dabbling in Hinduism and whatever. So then, because I had this reputation, with Whitney Houston, she literally called me Bishop. Like, my nickname was Bishop. I'm telling you, I played with her about a little over 7 years. For 6.5 of those years, she never called me Kirk. She called me Bishop because, like, we had this connection. Like, she knew that I was going to be the one to pray with the band before we went on, or I did a Bible study for them, and I would type it up on my little laptop and pass it out and all that. But so now I get to backstage. I normally don't play for, what do you think, there were like 7,000 people that night or something like that. I normally don't play for that many people. But I'm there with these musicians, including Dave Matthews, and I was privileged to pray with them. And now here's the thing. So where do I go with that opportunity? Am I trying to get them all saved in that prayer? No, not so much. No, what I'm doing is I'm embracing all of them and their specific faith traditions. Like, I'm not going to get burned at the stake for not just, in the name of Jesus, we call out the demons out here, and no, it's about now you're on the world stage, and you don't have to be apostate, to just say, honoring all the faith traditions assembled in this circle backstage. God, thank you for allowing us to serve these people. Thank you for health and strength, for the breath that we will take before we play the first note. Thank you for the camaraderie, for the fellowship. Thank you for these opportunities that you've given us. Now, would you please take this and do something really cool for these people that maybe they didn't expect when David plays such and such a song. In the name of God. Amen. You see, so I got some some evangelical brothers and sisters that would say, man, you missed a chance. I'm like, no, you really have to find a space to honor other people's faith traditions and to just kind of come alongside them. Because again, that arrogance, it just doesn't work,
And you also entrusted them with a part of yourself that you could have just kept to yourself. That's kind of lovely to see it. I can trust you with this part of myself too. Well, do you have something to bring us home with before we?
I will play a song. So maybe I'll stand up. The jazz blues roots of all of pop music share the root system with gospel Christian music. Like in the fields, the slave master made the mistake of letting these folks hear the gospel. And they came up with their own version of these songs. And man, then the slave master's like, let me slide over here. Let me hear what y'all doing. And that music became a blessing to the whole world, and it morphed and it just spread out into so many different things. But here's an example of a jazz standard. Drum solo. Keith Clapton.
Kirk, thank you. Let's do it again tomorrow night.
Same bat station.
The great theologian, mystic, and civil rights leader Howard Thurman once wrote, "Above and beyond all else, it must be borne in mind that hatred tends to dry up the springs of creative thought in the life of the hater." Creative souls like Kirk Whalum remind us of the other side of Thurman's insight, which is that there is a way back from hatred to love. But it's rarely the way of better explanations. It may not even be by way of verbal language at all. We may be at a moment in our world in which some of our old modes of communication are broken beyond repair, leaving us to even older ones like songs hummed into our cradles. Music and art can reach into our buried and forgotten humanity, the imago Dei in each of us, and awaken us to who God has made us to be, if only we'll learn to trust this truth. Sit with it, hum it, and refuse, at least for a while, to explain it entirely away. This episode of the Calvary Podcast is part of Calvary's Lenten preaching series, a nearly century-old tradition that invites wise and inspiring speakers into our pulpit during the season of Lent and onto our podcast beyond. The Calvary Podcast Lenten Preaching Edition is produced by Noah Glenn of Perpetual Motion. Our theme music was composed by Spence Bailey. Special thanks to Robin Banks, Director of Communications at Calvary, and Heidi Rupke, Lenten Preaching Series Coordination. And thanks to you for listening. Good night.
Applause, man.
Peace, my friend.
Yeah, brother. Thank you.